President Trump's big, beautiful spending bill is taken up by the Senate for consideration, while the president's trade war with China and Europe continues. New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith is here with an update on these stories and more. Plus, 2 Chinese nationals were caught attempting to smuggle hazardous materials into the U.S. this week. How will this incident affect already tense relations between the U.S. and China? Foreign policy expert Gordon Chang is here with analysis. And bioethicist Father Pacholczyk reacts to the latest news about the aggressive push to legalize assisted suicide in the United States and around the world over. Begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. An important show for you this week. If you'd like to comment, send me an X post. I'm at Raymond Arroyo and at Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube. President Trump's big, beautiful bill has made it through the House, and now it sits in the U.S. Senate as the civil war in Sudan rages on without much attention from the rest of the world. Joining me now to weigh in on these stories and more, please welcome U.S. Congressman from New Jersey, senior member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, Chris Smith. Congressman, thank you for being here. I want to begin with that so-called big, beautiful spending bill that made it through the House. We're being told that the bill makes no changes to Medicaid or Social Security, but includes provisions to protect both from rampant fraud and abuse with work requirements, etc. Does it? Does it fulfill that promise?
It does, and it was done painstakingly by the House majority and with the president's full concurrence. So I want to thank the Speaker especially for his leadership on this. But, you know, my Governor Murphy, was in Lakewood, New Jersey, and just given false information about what it does to Medicaid. This is happening everywhere. They have people who claim they're going to lose their Medicaid benefits who are in wheelchairs or are disabled. Absolutely untrue. What it does is say that an able-bodied person, with huge exceptions for women with small children, pregnant women, the elderly, anybody over 64, and we're looking at somebody who should do some either work or community service 20 hours a week to get Medicaid. We did it with food stamps back during the Clinton years, and amazingly, he signed it into law. Workfare is a very good thing, and that's what they're objecting to. What I find so appalling is the lack of truth in these charges that are being made, and it just happened last Friday in my own district with Governor Murphy.
Well, I'm glad you're here to set the record straight. Congressman, we all know the national debt is staggering, $36 trillion, and growing by the minute. I know there's talk among senators of making even deeper cuts to this bill. Will a bill with deeper cuts pass the House, or do you just fix it in reconciliation?
Well, I think reconciliation is for mandatory spending. It's not the only vehicle that can help mitigate our debt. I can't believe that some people think that that's the case. And there's a huge amount. I mean, we need to continue the $4 trillion in tax cuts, which if they go away, we will have the largest tax increase in the history of the United States. And I say to my Democratic friends, every one of whom voted against it, you just voted for the biggest tax increase ever. On average, 22% tax increase beginning at the end of this calendar year. So December 31st goes into January, biggest tax increase ever. And I'm just shocked at that. Now, in terms of deficit reduction, you can't do it in a single bill or even in a single year. Biden, unfortunately, spent money like I've never seen before. Taking some of that back, clawing it back, needs to be done, and we're doing it. But it doesn't happen overnight. And this is not the only vehicle. Plus, we want to safeguard Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Part of the reason why we have such huge expenses for Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, it's a good news story. People are living longer. So the amount of money that's needed to pay those benefits has increased significantly over the years. So I think it's a great news story. We just need to have to find ways elsewhere of finding where we can slow the rate of growth.
Congressman, one of the president's campaign promises, no tax on tips, overtime pay, and car loan interest, that was addressed in the bill. And the bill would also extend, as you mentioned, those Trump tax cuts from 2017. The Congressional Budget Office says it will add $2.4 trillion to the national debt over a decade. Will it?
I don't think it will, and the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, has gotten it wrong so many times when they project what the activity will be in our economy. They just don't seem, I mean, if we don't have the tax cuts, we're going to lose a lot of revenue because it will hamper economic growth very significantly. So I take it all with a grain of salt. For years, this reliance on CBO has been baffling to me because they get it wrong so often. So I hope that people will look at that and say, okay, take that into consideration. But frankly, we want a pro-growth economy and laws and policies that reflect that so that people want to can work and keep more of their hard-earned money. And that's exactly what will happen.
Creator of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, Elon Musk, had some harsh words for the bill this week. He called it a disgusting abomination in a series of ex-posts, and he said the bill's going to explode the already massive budget deficit. As we all know, Musk issued criticisms after exiting the administration. Congressman, your thoughts on what the always unpredictable Musk said, and why do these bills always contain so much pork in them?
Well, there's not pork the way most people think of it in this bill. I mean, the tax cuts tax cuts on tips, and especially the PBA and all the police organizations have endorsed the bill because overtime will not be taxed anymore. And I think that's a huge win for the men and women in uniform, the firefighters, the police, and they've endorsed the bill because they know that this, their rank and file work very hard to keep us safe. They don't get paid enough. Many of them do overtime to make ends meet for their family and to meet a very real need that's out there in terms of public safety. Thankfully, Trump's promise on that is being delivered in the House-passed bill. So I think that's a tremendous thing. Now, if that's pork, I'll have that kind of pork any day of the week. I don't see the pork that is usually just add-ons that are the bridge to nowhere type of things. That's not in here.
Mm-hmm. Other critics of the big beautiful bill say the legislation makes outsized cuts to important programs dealing with health and nutrition, education, clean energy, to cover the cost of the bill. How do you address those concerns?
Well, I think they need to delineate exactly how that's happening because they've been lying like crazy about the cuts in Medicaid. And frankly, I'm fed up. I've been here 45 years. I'm so tired of the false narrative promulgated by the Democratic Party every single year. Back in Reagan's year, they were saying that save Social Security, vote Democratic. When Reagan's people said, the sustainability is that we need to look at some reform. And those reforms went into effect years after they got their ounce of political flesh at the ballot box. They exaggerate, they lie, and I think people have to start taking what they say with an absolute grain of salt. Now, in terms of the green energy deal, I hope that the ocean wind development ends. I've been fighting it along my coast. Not only will it eviscerate the environment for our the whales and the dolphins and everything under the sea and destroy the fishing industry for the United States on the East Coast where these things go up. I mean, these poles are so high, the size of the Chrysler building and higher. The wingspan is, each one of the wings of the propellers is the size of a football field. And there's unbelievably amount of documentation that says beyond a shred of a doubt it will disrupt radar. So our planes and our vessels will have radar distorted and they won't see where they're going. And as you know, just recently, Newark Airport closed down, 3 times and counting, because of a faulty wiring situation that malaffected the radar. This will do it in spades. National Academy of Sciences did a report in 2022, and they said not only will it ruin radar, and you'll see things on the screen that aren't there, but it'll, even worse, people won't even know you're there. Next thing you know, a jet will hit another jet because they didn't know it was there.
I'm glad you brought that up because this affects New Jersey directly. There's a proposed $12.5 billion infusion to the FAA to modernize the air traffic control system. You mentioned Newark, and that's been in the news for weeks due to the air traffic control issues. Congressman, here's my question. Is this enough to fix what ails air travel today and what ails airports in your own district?
Well, I think this will go a long way. The neglect that has been shown over the course of decades for air traffic control and all of that is beyond words disturbing. So, for the safety of the flying public and the public that's out on boats, we got to make sure that radar and other capabilities are absolutely world class. And frankly, they're not. And they will go demonstrably worse if ocean wind development continues. It's a false promise that somehow this is going to deliver on mitigating global warming and things like that. These things, and here's something nobody talks about. Two things.
Yeah.
They will not survive hurricanes. We get them on the East Coast. Category 3, one study said a half of them will topple, but also after 15 to 20 years, every one of them will be decommissioned. What are you going to do with that pile of junk that's out there? Who's going to take it out of the sea?
Congressman, there's also a program I want to get to before we run out of time. In the bill, it incentivizes having children with the creation of new so-called Trump saving accounts into which the federal government will deposit $1,000 for every child born between 2024 and 2028. Do you think that's going to help the baby deficit that we have in this country? I mean, we're not at replacement level right now.
Well, I think it'll help those who decide they do want to have babies, and we need to be affirming at every chance we get those men and women, those mothers and dads who want to make sure that their kids are well taken care of. And we know that the economy for some has been very, very hard. So I do think while it will not, I don't think the intent is to encourage or discourage having children, but we need to accommodate those who want to have children to the greatest extent possible. We also have in the bill the funding of Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood has killed 10 million babies in their clinics, about 400,000 every year. Talk about a group that, they're Child Abuse Incorporated. They push the abortion pill, and they deny all of this, especially the recent information about how injurious the abortion pill is to the mother. 10% requiring a very significant interventions, healthcare-wise. So, and they're giving it out like nobody else on the planet. And so we wanted to fund them.
Before we go, I know you've been concerned about this ongoing civil war in Sudan. We've reported on it for many years. Just since 2023, over 18,000 civilian deaths have been reported, with some estimates going as high as 150,000. It's also estimated that between 4 and 10 million have been displaced. The people of Sudan are suffering a genocide, Congressman. Just last month, the Trump administration announced it would impose sanctions on Sudan for the violation of the Chemical and Biological Weapons Control and Warfare Elimination Act of 1991. Now, you co-sponsored that act.
Yes,
Your
I did.
thoughts on these sanctions, and will they have the effect on the horrors we've been seeing in Sudan for decades?
Great question. That legislation did become law, and it's chemical weapons, biological weapons, all of these means of destroying and killing people. They are crimes against humanity, and they're using them. I was very glad that the Trump administration imposed sanctions. I applauded them. I chaired a hearing just a couple weeks ago on this very issue of Sudan. I remember going to Darfur and other places, Khartoum, of course, the capital. And in Darfur, I went to 2 of the camps there. And at that time, there was a guy named Bashir who was just committing genocide in plain sight.
Right.
Well, it's back. It's back. And the killing of these wonderful Sudanese people is just beyond words. We just have to do far more to try to stop that bloodshed. I do believe there needs to be a special envoy named. In the past, Danforth did a great job former senator, in trying to stop killing there. But we need the same kind of high level as the ear of our president, who can go and get everybody in front of to talk to try to stop the bloodshed, because it'll just go on in perpetuity otherwise.
Congressman Smith, there was a report this week of 5 people killed in an attack on a UN aid convoy in northern Darfur, where you were just mentioning.
Exactly.
The aid is meant to alleviate a famine in the area. Will anyone be held accountable for this?
I hope, but I wouldn't be too optimistic. Healthcare workers in the field are a very, very brave group of people. And minimally, you would think that warring factions would say, don't touch them. They might be coming to help me or my family. But, it's almost no holds bars. They go after them as well. We've seen that all over the world, including in Sudan.
No, it's a horrendous region that doesn't get nearly the media coverage it deserves. I thank you for staying on it.
But ditto for Nigeria as well. Where more Christians have been killed there than anywhere else in the world, and Muslims, pious Muslims, a close second. The killing by the Fulani and by the Boko Haram and these other terrorist groups has continued. And during the Biden administration, nothing was done. Our Secretary of State then took away most country of particular concern, and he gave them a free pass, which I continue to find appalling.
I hope the Trump administration puts it back on that list of countries of particular concern. Congressman Chris Smith, we will leave it there. Thank you for your vigilance, and we will talk to you in the days ahead.
Thank you so much, Raymond. It's always good to talk to you.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, 2 Chinese nationals had been arrested at the Detroit airport this week for attempting to transport potentially hazardous material into the United States. Meanwhile, President Trump's trade tariffs continue to be an issue between China, Europe, and the U.S. How are all of these developments affecting U.S.-China relations, and what of that surprise Ukrainian drone attack? Joining me to discuss all of this, author and foreign policy expert Gordon Chang. Gordon, thank you for being back on the program. The big story this week, and the one I think with chilling implications, is the one of these 2 Chinese nationals charged with attempting to smuggle a hazardous fungus, a possible biological pathogen, into the U.S. via the airport. These 2 individuals, a couple, are citizens of China and are allegedly receiving support for their research on the substance of this by the Chinese government. Some of that research done at the University of Michigan. What do you make of this arrest and these charges, Gordon?
This looks like a biological weapons attack on our farms. And we've got to put this into context, Raymond. In 2020, Americans in all 50 states received unsolicited, they received seeds unsolicited from China. I think this was an attempt to get Americans to plant invasive species in our country. This year, Temu, the online Chinese retailer, actually sent seeds unsolicited into America. So this is part of a pattern. This Detroit matter is part of a pattern to attack us. And we have to treat it that way.
And does this indicate a change in China's tactics going forward, Gordon? One that we should be more sensitive to?
China has this plan of unrestricted warfare, as they call it. So this has been going on for quite some time. But I think that the attempts at us are actually more bold now than they have been, let's say, a decade ago. So we got to be worried about the trend of events.
Tell me for a moment about the kind of damage this might have done had this substance been unleashed on the public, Gordon. What might we have seen?
This is a devastation of grains. It could have been wheat, maize, rice, barley. The United States is an agricultural superpower, and we depend on it. We feed ourselves. If we couldn't feed ourselves, we would be in jeopardy. China right now is in a situation where it is becoming less and less food self-sufficient. So they know what's at stake, and they want us to share their situation.
Yeah. Gordon, what needs to be done in response to this? I mean, I came across a story today. This goes back to November of 2023, where there was a Fresno lab that was busted, closed for illegal activities. And at the time, it was speculated that the Chinese may be using that to create bioterrorism on our own shores.
Yes, in that lab, by the official count, there were at least 20 pathogens, including the one for Ebola. I mention Ebola because at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, they are now studying how to weaponize that disease, which has a natural fatality rate of 50%. The good thing about Ebola is that it's not readily transmissible human to human. But if the Chinese can figure out how to do that, then they've got a weapon to exterminate a large portion of the American population. And by the way, in that lab, they found almost 1,000 mice that had been genetically engineered to spread disease. So this was a secret Chinese biological weapons lab.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that got so little coverage. I mean, I remember when it came out, but then it quickly vanished and we moved on. But here we see the pattern. If they busted that lab and now they've got this couple coming into the United States with their own, pathogen carry-on, what's to stop them from doing something home-based? I mean, you've been covering this for years. There are Chinese agents here now who mean us harm. What should be done in regard to them? And tell me about how we should be scrutinizing everything coming into the country.
Yeah, first of all, from China, we need to inspect every container, every package, every envelope, every suitcase. But also, this is an emergency situation. The Chinese regime talks about going to war. They've identified us as their enemy. So we should no longer think of this as peacetime, which means that the measures we take need to be drastic. And that means, I think, severing most, if not all, commerce and investment, and a lot of the travel between the two countries. And I know people will think that's going too far, but we're being overwhelmed right now, Raymond, and we could lose our country.
Well, we did it with Russia. We cut Russia off for a good period of time. We just didn't do business with them. They were the evil empire, and until they returned to some semblance of normalcy, you couldn't do business with them. Why is China held at arm's length and given special status? I mean, President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping are likely to speak this week after several flare-ups that have threatened a tentative trade agreement. What's happened there with this tariff tit for tat? And do you think an agreement is in the offing, or should we just stop all relations?
I think we should stop attempts to have this tariff pause and impose severe costs on China. Got to remember that May 12th agreement that we reached with China, that part of it was that China would reverse all of the non-tariff measures it had put in place after April 2nd. Liberation Day, as President Trump calls it. But China's failed to honor that promise. So I think, talking to China is just useless. And especially right now with these attacks on our farms, we should just say, look, we've had enough of this. We're going to start defending ourselves. And we have got to make sure that we protect the American people. And if that means we're going to have to sever relations with China, so be it.
Gordon, China says the U.S. is severely violating the pause, the trade truce. What do they mean? What are they talking about?
Yeah, what are they talking about? Because the U.S. has complied with its obligations under that. Now, since that May 12th agreement, both China and the U.S. have imposed additional measures on each other, but they're not part of the May 12th agreement. Clearly, we have not violated that. China's just saying that because they know they violated it. They want to throw some more crap on the wall, see if it sticks. But we should just be very clear. We have not violated the May 12th agreement.
Okay. Last weekend, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth in Singapore told a global security conference hosted by the International Institute for Security Studies that the threat China poses to Taiwan is real. Watch this.
To be clear, any attempt by Communist China to conquer Taiwan by force would result in devastating consequences for the Indo-Pacific and the world. There's no reason to sugarcoat it. The threat China poses is real, and it could be imminent. We hope not, but it certainly could be.
Real and imminent, yes. As we already know. I mean, China's vowed to reunify with Taiwan by force if necessary. Taiwan's government's rejecting Beijing's sovereignty claims. How soon do you think China could make a move on Taiwan?
We've got to be prepared for anything at any place at any time. And it's not just Taiwan. I think there are places where there's a higher probability of Chinese attack. So for instance, the last couple of months, there's been extremely provocative Chinese military activity against South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, and faraway Australia. And anything can happen along that periphery. So it's not just Taiwan.
Yeah, well, Hegseth also encouraged allies in the Indo-Pacific region, including Australia, to invest more in their own security. And the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, he pledged an extra $6 billion. How vital is Australia's participation in defense to that region? Or is this a case of too little too late, given what the Chinese have been doing in the South China Sea, Gordon?
Well, Australia could be very important because in the fight with China, we're going to need all of our friends and partners in the region. And Australia was important in World War II in a similar type situation. So yes, we need that base. And we also need the Australians to turf out the Chinese from their country. So this is going to be an all of society effort, because we got to remember, Xi Jinping talks about going to war, and his effort is all of society because he's mobilizing civilians to go to war. He's calling up reservists, and he is taking over civilian factories so they can turn out production for the Chinese military.
June 4th marks the 36th anniversary, I can't believe it, of the Tiananmen Square massacre, Beijing's bloody crackdown on pro-democracy protesters. According to Reuters, Taiwan is the only part of the Chinese-speaking world where June 4th will be commemorated. Certainly in the United States, Britain, Australia, other Western countries, they'll mark the occasion. But Gordon, public discussion of what happened in Tiananmen Square is strictly taboo in China. Give me a sense of why this matters so much to them. They've always blamed the protests on the democracy advocates. Your thoughts on the importance of this and significance of this occasion?
This is incredibly significant. The Communist Party views it that way, which is the reason why they go to absurd lengths to prevent any discussion, any knowledge of it. What's really interesting, Raymond, is that because they've been so successful in scrubbing history of Tiananmen, a lot of Chinese people don't know about it. The reason why Deng Xiaoping killed civilians in 1989 was to teach them a lesson that the Communist Party was willing to kill to keep itself in power. A lot of Chinese people right now are not as afraid of the regime as they should be because the regime has whitewashed it. And that is also a danger to the regime. But clearly, we must keep the memory of the thousands who died that night because we have to understand the maliciousness and the evil of that regime. China
blasted the U.S. on Monday over moves it alleged harmed Chinese interests, including issuing AI chip export control guidelines and stopping the sales of chip-designed software to China. There's also that planned revoke of the Chinese student visas. Give me a sense of whether any of this is credible, Gordon, and what are you hearing about this situation?
Well, the Chinese regime is really upset about this, which means that we're probably doing the right thing. These measures could be more effective. We've had chip sanctions on China. We've had other sanctions on China, but we've applied them in ways where they were designed to not be effective. We gave the Chinese long notice of what we were going to do so they had time to readjust. Our sanctions weren't as comprehensive as they needed to be, and they certainly were not enforced with the vigor that was necessary. I hope that the Trump administration really gets serious about sanctions. And, with regard to the student visas, yeah, throwing out a lot of Chinese students will harm us, but we're being overwhelmed by some very dangerous elements among those students. And we know that the Chinese regime has weaponized them against us. So we have no choice. This is a matter of national survival.
Before we go, I want to get your reaction to this and the potential Chinese involvement here. On June 1st, more than 100 Ukrainian drones were launched at and struck air bases inside Russia, targeting nuclear-capable long-range bombers. According to Ukrainian President Zelensky, who directly supervised this operation, dubbed Spiderweb, 117 drones had been used in that attack. It took a year and 6 months to plan and execute. So, Gordon, this is being called Pearl Harbor, or a Pearl Harbor moment for Russia. How serious is this attack? And How do you see this spinning out? And talk to me for a moment about China's influence vis-a-vis Russia.
China has supported the Russian war effort from the beginning. It greenlighted the invasion with that February 4th, 2022 joint statement of no limits partnership. Since then, China has been providing military intelligence, elevated commodity purchases to finance the war, opened up its financial system to sanction Russian institutions, diplomatic support, propaganda support, weapons, and Chinese soldiers are in Ukraine. They're both mercenaries, plus there's also People's Liberation Army officers in the Russian army right now, observing and learning what's going on. So China is a combatant, and unfortunately, we have refused to recognize that, and we have not imposed the sanctions on China that is absolutely necessary.
Gordon Chang, we will leave it there. For all the latest reports and analysis, you can follow Gordon at Gordon G. Chang on X. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Raymond.
This week on the Arroyo Grande podcast, I spoke with Christian McGuigan. He's the founder of Sycamore Studios, and we talked about what went wrong with children and family entertainment and how he and his studio believes they can fix it. And more importantly, why this matters to you, your children, and your family. Take a look. What did Disney do wrong, Christian, in recent years? And what ails children's films today?
So what we've seen really over the last 4 to 5 years, and maybe it's over a decade or so, where families were starting to say, wow, I don't like the way that character speaks to their parents, or I don't like the fact that no Disney princess has a mother. There's been things that people have had bones to pick with the Walt Disney Company, but it was still the Walt Disney Company. It was still the brand that you knew you could love and trust virtually no matter what. Yeah. And then over the last 5 years, what started to happen was they started introducing elements of the entertainment that what we at Sycamore Studios call the middle seat test, where we say, if this is a topic that while on a middle seat of an airplane, you don't want to have a conversation with a stranger about, it probably shouldn't be in children's entertainment. And when you start introducing that into children's entertainment, you start complicating parents' lives. You start making it more difficult, and you start on the really negative end of this, you start introducing topics and conversations that parents need to determine when and where they're going to have those conversations with their children. And you're in some cases forcing them to have them before the parents, or most definitely the children are ready to have those. And when that happens, especially with the mama bears, that's when the claws start to come out, and you start to, broach that trust. And we've seen it. 80 million Americans last year avoided Walt Disney Entertainment films because of politics. And that's wild to even say that.
The entire Arroyo Grande interview with Christian McGuigan is on YouTube at Arroyo Grande Show, or wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, iHeart. Be sure to check it out and subscribe so you don't miss an Arroyo Grande episode. We also have a new Prayerful Posse show. Father Jerry Murray and I talk about a sacrilegious new episode of an Apple Plus series and what the Pope might do about those Latin Mass restrictions. We spent last week's episode exposing those newly announced policies of Bishop Michael Martin to stamp out the traditional Latin Mass in all but one chapel in his Charlotte, North Carolina diocese. He claimed he was doing it to promote the concord and unity of the church. Well, after a ferocious backlash, both inside and outside the Charlotte diocese, Bishop Martin is slowing his roll. He's still planning on killing the Mass in 4 parishes and allowing it in that new chapel. But instead of July 8th, the changes will occur now on October 2nd. Bishop Martin says this will allow the faithful and clergy to, quote, absorb the changes. Your reaction, Father? I mean, he's still killing the Mass.
I think this is a very wise decision on his part. I'm sure he never expected the level of upsetness that this would create, and then beyond the borders, so to speak. So yeah, I'm very pleased he made this decision, because as he said in his communication, if Pope Leo makes another decision, any other decisions regarding the Mass, then they'll abide by that. So that's a very wise decision. In fact, that would have been the wisdom. Don't do anything until Pope Leo makes some provision, because we all know this is one of the top agenda items that's sitting on his desk. what to do about Latin Mass going.
Well, we talked about this last week when Pope Francis died, and this was still a source of such controversy. Why do anything until you get new guidance from the new man in charge? But vis-a-vis that, the Pope Leo, met with Cardinal Roche, who's the head of the Vatican's liturgy office, very early in the week. Did that have any effect, do you think, or might it have?
It's possible. It's possible that the Pope has been briefed on the situation in Charlotte and may have asked Cardinal Roche to, put a little bit of space in between, the document from Bishop Martin and what's going to happen eventually. And if that's the case, that's all to the good. We don't know that, so that's speculation. But it's a nice thing that the Bishop Martin has decided that it's in the interest of everyone that nothing happen at the moment.
That drops Friday. Visit RaymondArroyo.com for all the links. The push for assisted suicide here in the United States and around the world is gaining momentum. Here with analysis of these developments and more is neuroscientist and senior ethicist at the National Catholic Bioethics Center, Father Tad Pacholczyk. Father, thank you for being here. Delaware Governor Matt Meyer signed legislation to legalize physician-assisted suicide for some terminally ill patients. This is the 11th state to allow medical aid in dying after nearly a decade of debate on this issue. What do you make of this Delaware decision, Father?
Well, Raymond, I think we do see something of a trend here. 7 states currently have pending bills to legalize assisted suicide. And now the good news in all of this is that there are 11 states in the last year that have pushed back and, refused to ratify this kind of thing. But with all of that, then there's this kind of mixed piece, which is that there are 4 states that are trying to expand access by, in a sense, relaxing the current laws that allow for assisted suicide. So we have, kind of a mixed bag. I think Americans are a little bit ambiguous on this. I think people are uncomfortable with the notion of assisted suicide, but we see enough momentum from the advocates that it's gaining ground. I mean, as you know, in France as well, it was just legalized. And Great Britain is very active. The debate is very active over there as well. So, and, we have certain places like Oregon and the Netherlands where this is really well established and entrenched, and we can see, some of the fallout from those areas.
Yeah, well, on April 29th, the New York State Assembly passed a Medical Aid in Dying Act by a vote of 81 to 67. 20 Democrats broke ranks to join Republicans to oppose it, though it must still pass the Senate and receive Governor Kathy Hochul's signature. Your thoughts, whether this could get signed by her? Can it get through the Senate there and be signed by the governor? Is it likely to pass, do you think?
I think the fact that this is passed in California and New York a lot of times seem to be on the same wavelength. I'm not optimistic that they're going to be able to hold it back, but I know that, the church and others in the state are working vigorously to push back. I think, we're in a funny time, Raymond, just to kind of maybe broaden this a bit. I think that we have a lot of people who feel that when they get something like a terminal diagnosis, that, this is some kind of real option that they're imagining and supposing. And the reason is that they are living, in a certain sense, lives without real hope. And I think, the beauty of the Christian message is that we provide a real foundation of hope. And it reminds me of something that Pope Paul VI said many years ago. He said, our citizenship is in heaven, and we must live eschatologically. I know it's a big word, but it means, looking towards the next life, stretched toward the hope that does not disappoint. And we have so many people who are secular in their orientation without any kind of foundation in religion or faith. And with that, you don't have hope. I think you're always grasping at straws. And when things look desperate, physician-assisted suicide becomes a real temptation, and you almost start then to call it a good. And I think the fundamental error here is anytime we treat something that's objectively good, like our own life, the gift of life that we have not conferred upon ourselves, and we treat it as if it's an evil that needs to be expunged, that needs to be canceled out. We are crossing a huge and fundamental moral line. And, it's amazing how far this has gotten in my mind, but I do think it's a reflection of a very, very secularized society.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about Canada because that's very near to home here. Voluntary euthanasia accounted for 4.7% of the deaths in Canada in 2023. And new government data shows the country's fifth annual report since euthanasia was legalized in 2016, 15,300 people underwent assisted suicide last year. Father Tad, that's a shocking statistic. I mean, assisted suicide now accounts for 1 in 20 Canadian deaths. Isn't that a dress rehearsal for the rest of North America? And talk for a moment about the financial incentive here that we never hear discussed.
Yeah, the financial incentive is real. I'm reminded of a case a few years back in Oregon where there was a woman who had a cancer that was able to be treated using a particular drug that cost something like $2,000 per dose. It was a new drug. I think it was called Tarceva. And she wasn't able to get the Oregon health plan to pay for it, but they wrote her a letter declining to pay for it and at the same time noting that they would provide coverage for assistance in dying. And, she was furious about this, that this became, a financial consideration, which it truly is. And I think people feel the pressure. It's like, well, look, if, I'm in a situation where I'm consuming a lot of resources, don't I have an obligation to make an early exit? And the pressure is there. The pressure is real. And it doesn't come just from the side of the patient. It also comes, I'm afraid, from the side of the medical professionals. They will sometimes make their own assessments about what we call quality of life. And,
Yeah, I
that
love that.
ends up becoming a kind of a fait accompli where you then decline to provide what individuals really need and would benefit from, and kind of make hasty generalizations that cut their health care short. Now, this is also, worth mentioning in the same breath, Raymond, that what we have from the medical side of the equation is truly impressive, and I would even say outstanding when it's done right. And this would be palliative care. At the end of
Yeah.
life, providing the kind of attention that people need that's customized to their situation as they decline, but not offering them this temptation to take a toxin that the doctor has prescribed. I mean, I sometimes think about this just even in terms of the contradiction that's right at the heart of it with the medical
Yeah.
professional, helping out in this. I say to myself, look, would a doctor ever take a patient and let's say they're bound to a wheelchair because they're just so sick right now and getting close to death, would he roll them out to a nearby bridge and then say to them, I'm not going to push you over the bridge, but now you can just step out and jump over the edge yourself? And we say, no, of course a doctor wouldn't do that, shouldn't do that. But that's precisely the same type of cooperation in evil that occurs when he writes the prescription for a deadly drug and then provides it for the patient to self-administer.
Well, and worse, Father, when they say, oh, but don't worry about it. You've got a 2-doctor verification process. We've seen this in Europe, where, 2 doctors have to sign off before this, self-inflicted assisted dying can happen. Well, these 2 doctors, in many cases, in Europe we've seen, they're pre-signing these documents. So, there's a health pressure because of the financial, the money lost at end-of-life care. They want to hasten this. They want these people off the scene. French lawmakers, as you mentioned earlier, they approved a bill to legalize assisted dying. I mean, this is paving the way for France to become the latest European nation to allow the terminally ill to end their lives. Right now, Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Switzerland, Australia, Germany, Spain, Portugal, Austria, rather, all allow so-called assisted dying in some form, Father Tad. Once Catholic France is now headed down this path. Why? Why do you think they're all embracing this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think it harkens back to this sense of a loss of hope that I alluded to earlier. And I mean, your point about the way the whole thing is shifting, that previously you required two doctors to verify. And there's a number of safeguards which are putatively put into place, waiting periods. You know what they're doing in Oregon? This is amazing. They're trying to get a bill passed that will reduce the waiting period after you request physician-assisted suicide, to reduce it from 14 days to 2 days, just 2 days. That's a huge jump. And of course, this is precisely what happens, Raymond. As soon as it's been legalized, the reason you put the safeguards in at the beginning is for those people who are hesitant or doubtful about, doing physician-assisted suicide or voting for it. Maybe they'll get on board and support us. But then as soon as you've got the law on the books, then you immediately weaken it, take away the safeguards.
Contracting.
Another thing, yeah, exactly. And I mean, in the Netherlands, fascinating that they have had a requirement for reporting, that the doctors, whenever they participate in this, they have to fill out a number of forms, explain the circumstances and so on. And the doctors get tired of the forms. They've been, routinely, this is euthanasia now, not physician-assisted suicide. So the doctor is actually killing the individuals. And what they do, instead of going through the rigmarole of the paperwork, they just make a decision at a certain point to administer on their own initiative high doses of morphine and end the person's life, even if the person hasn't asked for it. And then they can just say, well, we're just managing pain. I don't have to fill out all the paperwork. So all these supposed safeguards, when you're crossing a fundamental moral line, it all just gets pushed to the side very quickly. And we end up, going down what's the proverbial slippery slope.
Yeah, well, and as you know, anytime you're dealing with people at end of life or with a catastrophic disease, depression is a real consideration. And when you give someone a 2-day window to reconsider their own death sentence, essentially, if they're in a depressive state, they may never come out of that.
Among depressed individuals already, in general, there is a 20-fold elevated rate of suicide. 20-fold. So now you offer them physician-assisted suicide as another option here. Of course, you're lowering the barriers, and you're failing to provide the kind of mental health care that these individuals are entitled to. They're entitled to a charitable concern on our part, as Catholic healthcare providers and all healthcare providers. Maybe let me just close, Raymond, with a reflection from Hippocrates. That ancient surgeon, Greek surgeon. He was secular, and he was very strongly opposed to this notion. He said, I will never give a deadly potion to anybody who asks for it, nor will I make a suggestion to this effect. And that's exactly the attitude that I think all healthcare providers should be rigorously adopting. You don't have to be even religious to see it. He was, pre-Christian, 4th century BC, and already he could see with great clarity that key insight.
A bill to legalize assisted suicide in Illinois has stalled in the state Senate. If it passed, Father, it would have made it legal for doctors to give terminally ill patients life-ending drugs. Death certificates, etc., would list the cause of death as terminal illness, not suicide. A number of Catholic lawmakers argued against the bill, helping to stall it for now. Even Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago condemned the bill, saying if passed, it would spur a suicide contagion. Your thoughts?
Well, it's very interesting because during the testimony for this bill, Raymond, there were practicing physicians who came out against it. One of them was actually Representative Bill Howder, a Republican. And he said, that if this passes, it will change forever the soul of medicine. And I think that's a wonderful way to put it. The physicians are pushing back. And, the American Medical Association has this code of ethics that has been part and parcel of their kind of background. And for years, it has basically said that any push for physician-assisted suicide is incompatible with the physician's role as healer. So my opinion here is that it is going to have to be the medical profession in particular that really pushes back, in alliance with the Catholic Church and with many Protestants who are also deeply concerned about this, and finally with disability groups as well.
Before we go, I want to get your reaction to this story. Adriana Smith, a pregnant woman in Georgia, was declared brain dead after a medical emergency. She's been kept on life support for 3 months by doctors to allow enough time for the baby to be born and comply with Georgia's strict anti-abortion law. Reports are she is being compelled to carry her baby to term due to the law. Father, talk about the ethical concerns at play here. It's a very sad situation. I mean, if the woman's taken off life support, chances are the baby, who's been named Chance, will not survive.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tragic situation, as you point out. But through the miracles of medicine, we have this possibility, it appears in this particular case, to shuttle this pregnancy all the way to viability. Even though the mom is deceased, she had a series of blood clots and a stroke, and she's been diagnosed as brain dead. So there isn't anything they can do for the mom. And so the question becomes, isn't this reasonable to take care of the only remaining patient here, who is the baby Chance, as you said? And I think this is a very reasonable thing to attempt, and I'm glad that the hospital is doing this. I point out to people that a mom will take extreme steps to protect her child. If her child, for example, if she was holding her child in her arms and she noticed maybe a man not too far away point a gun, and she was afraid that it would hit her baby, she would turn her back into the path of the bullet to take the bullet. So isn't it a reasonable thing to conclude that the mother here would be willing to give her body in this way over to the protection of her child?
Abortion advocates claim that continuing a pregnancy like this is akin to abusing a corpse, or, quote, making women human incubators, and that Adriana should be removed from life support so her family can bury her and grieve her passing. The hospital has declined to do that because of the pro-life bill in place in Georgia. My question is the continued use of life support, is that a case of extraordinary means? Could it be ethically
It really
stopped?
is. Yeah, no, it really is not a case of this because the mom is already deceased. You use the classical benefit burden analysis, which is ordinary, extraordinary, when you have a living person and you're making decisions about their well-being. That doesn't apply to the mom anymore. She has died. So you have to now shift over to the baby and ask, what about ordinary, extraordinary? Is it extraordinary for the baby to continue to gestate? Well, hardly, not really at all. I mean, this is the normal state of affairs for the baby in the womb. And so we need to do our best to support the continuation of that pregnancy in the hopes that baby Chance will be born. And, I think part of the reason, to be frank with you, that the other side is pushing so hard on this case, just think about it, Raymond. What if this baby were to be successfully born, crosses the threshold of viability and grows up and then later says, look at how generous my mom was. Even after she died, she offered to take care of me in this way through this very unusual set of medical circumstances that I had to navigate as an unborn baby. So it's a real pro-life testament as well. So it's not an abuse of the corpse in any way. It's not that the mom's being used as an incubator. Think about it. If you were to go up to a pregnant woman walking down the street and say to her, hey, you're an incubator, I mean, she would be offended, and rightly so. And of course, the mom in this case, Adriana Smith, we can't use that kind of devaluing and dehumanizing language to describe her situation. It's tragic. It's true. We wish she was still alive, but it's not reasonable to forego treatment on behalf of her child, who she clearly wanted to see the light of day.
Well, Father Tad Pacholczyk, thank you for your insight as always, and for commentary by Father Tad. You can go to the National Catholic Bioethics Center website at ncbcenter.org. Thank you, Father.
Thank you so much, Raymond. Great to be with you.
That is all the time we have for now, but be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.